All right, so we've got those business bits out of the way. Let's get on to the business end. And the sessions over the next few hours or so are going to be split into 3 categories: rights holders, teams, and the brands. And it is brands that we're going to kick off with this morning, because our first session will be defining the brand and shaping strategy. So please welcome Stewart Mison, who's the Strategic Development Director from the Global Sports team at Microsoft. We've got Mark Savage, the Chief Commercial Officer at Icon, and in a slight change from the programme, Susan Agliata. Did I get that right, Susan? She'll tell us exactly how to pronounce her name. Sorry, Susan. Head of Branded Content Solutions at Google for Europe, Middle East and Africa. To lead them is James Emmett, who's the Editorial Director at SportsPro. Please give him a warm welcome, everybody. James, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ore. Thank you very much. Susan Agliata and the rest of the gang, do have a seat. We've got a very broad range of perspectives here, and I wanted to talk about sort of the beginning of the brand journey, but I think we can probably take a journey all the way through sort of partnership, through activation, measurement with all of you guys. And I think obviously the best place to start is if you all just give a little bit of context about your organisations and what you do with them. Susan, we'll go to you first.
Well, I hope Google needs no introduction, but what I do is I lead up a team called Branded Content Solutions, and what that really means is that I help our top brands and agencies across Middle East, Europe, and Africa work with YouTube creators, develop content strategies specifically on YouTube. As we know, YouTube has grown exponentially in the last 5 years. I help our brands understand what that opportunity is.
Mark, we'll come to you, and I know that you have a video lined up in the can for us to look at.
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody. I'm Mark Savage, the Chief Commercial Officer at Icon. Icon creates and delivers live events, experiential and branded experiences. And we're very proud to be here with 2 great panelists today. Icon works across the field of sport. We work in football with UEFA and FIFA. We work with the UCB in cricket. We work in golf. We work in tennis. We've even delivered the netball in Australia in the last few weeks, and we've delivered Olympic and Paralympic Games. So Icon, very familiar in the world of sport. And I think what I bring to this panel is the implementation side of expertise as opposed to the strategic side. Thank you.
Shall we? Do you want to run the video now?
That is your call.
I'm going to call it. Let's run that video. Excellent. Thanks for the work. Stewart, Strategic Development Director for the Global Sports Team at Microsoft. Didn't know that Microsoft had a global sports team.
There you are, best kept secret in the world. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stewart Mison, as James has just said. I'm pretty new to Microsoft. I hope Microsoft needs very little introduction to you. If it does, we've got a problem. The Global Sports Team, this is a very new initiative from Microsoft. You'll be used to dealing with Microsoft because we supply Windows programs, or we help you with your Excel spreadsheets. Microsoft has gone through a transformation over the last 18 months, 2 years, since our new chief exec came in, Satya Nadella. We're no longer about selling boxes of widgets or licenses. We're about offering business transformation solutions. And when we took a look at the sports industry, globally it's worth about $1.5 trillion all in, about 2% of annual GDP. And we didn't have a position as a company within that industry. We're good in banking, we're good in healthcare, we're good in government services. And a decision was taken that we wanted to start in the sports industry. And when we started looking at it, it's a business, I think we'd all agree in this room, that certain elements are pretty redundant in the way that they transact in business. And there's a business transformation opportunity. So my task is to take that complete transformation solution to federations, to clubs, to leagues, and to show them the way that they can actually engage with their global fan base and find new ways of communicating and integrating that fan base in their go-to-market strategies and being able to monetize that. And a little video we've got will show you some of the work that we've been doing with a small club in Spain called Real Madrid. So if we could run VT, please.
We live in a world of mobile technology, but it is not the device that is mobile, it is you.
When there is a game, when there is a training, when there is a goal, our duty is to bring that information as fast as possible to the people. Real Madrid have about 450 million fans. We're trying to give them all feeling of being at the stadium. The Microsoft Cloud gives us the scalability to communicate exactly the content that people want to see. Microsoft Cloud allows us to establish a relationship that is more personal, is more direct with the fans. It will help people connect to their passion of living Real Madrid.
Wonderful. As Ori said earlier, we are keen to make all of our events as interactive as possible. So if you've got questions, do put your hands up at any time. I'll try and get them in. Talk to us. As we said earlier, a broad range of perspectives, and so a couple of broad questions to begin with. To all of you, I suppose, how does any given company go about defining its brand values and selecting the best platform to get those values across? Stewart, maybe I'll come to you first.
Okay, so this, let me answer this from a perspective of having worked in the sports industry for 25 odd years. I think when you look at sport as a brand, when you start looking at sport, you actually have to look at it, take the emotion out of it, forget the old, it's the chairman's wife's favourite passion, sport, and look at it as a media communications channel. And then start setting it some very key objectives. Look at what the spend is against what the return of investment can be. And there is any way that your agencies and you can actually model what that ROI is. It can come down to, well, just how many eyeballs can I get, and can I buy those number of eyeballs in a much better way? And then, is the equity transfer from the sport relevant to my brand value? Is there a strategic fit? What does research tell me about the fit to my sport, to my brand, to that next sport? Then begin to look and say, well, outside of a media component, is there a CSR component that can actually be fitted within that? And then look at where the engagement platforms are. where do I actually begin to engage with the fan? And that's not just on the great work that companies like Icon can actually do at the point of play. It's actually beginning to look back and saying, where do I engage with digital media? You know, is there a YouTube platform that I should employ? Or, as you've seen us do with Real Madrid, where does a company such as Microsoft begin to work with building an engagement program that actually connects on a one-to-one basis with the global fan base? And what you didn't see with the Real Madrid app is that we are now a platform as a service for sport. We've got a very sophisticated CRM dynamic within the platform. We've got a highly complex video player which ingests content from multiple sources. It can take payments in for premium content. It can service up to 2 million people at any one second of transaction. So what Microsoft has done, I hope, and this isn't an app where it is an advert for us, what we've actually done is we built an engagement platform that fits within the eco-structure of sports sponsorship. So as a brand manager, I would look at finding ways that we address, does it deliver at the top line? Does it get the exposure that I need? Can I buy that exposure in any other way? Does it have a cause and social responsibility factor? So am I engaging with the community in different ways? What am I like what is the collateral like? How am I engaging with the fan that's actually on the ground? And then how do I employ digital media, both as a secondary platform and also as a fan engagement platform?
Susan, digital media as a secondary platform. Obviously, it's not. Go ahead.
I would actually argue it should be a primary platform in some cases. And I think in terms of just if you drill down to what a sponsorship is supposed to achieve in terms of awareness, in terms of brand association, what we're seeing now is that if you want to reach the new generation of fan, and most of us in this room, to be honest, are not that demographic, but that new generation of fan, that millennial, you have to be authentic about that brand communication. That is absolutely key. The old tactics simply do not work. You are dealing with a new generation that is more cynical. They do not believe the typical brand messages that have been communicated. In order to be authentic, you have to partner and engage in an authentic way, whether that means collaborating with the YouTube community, for example, whether that means sponsoring the broad range of content that is available, that is authentic, that has existing fan bases. That really depends on what your KPIs are, what your objectives are. But first and foremost, it has to be a different message. It has to be a more real message, less broadcast and more true engagement, communication, community, speaking to your fans versus just broadcasting that more traditional message.
I think you talked about something quite important there in authenticity, and we'll come back to that in a second. But Mark, same question to you.
So going back to the original question of brand values, I think as you're pulling those together, I think there are a number of stakeholders and a number of audiences in the first instance you have to consider. And brand values have to be developed, they have to be lived and breathed at the heart. And I think the first port of call for development of a brand platform and your brand values is your own people. What do they believe in? You have to interact with them, you have to engage with them. You cannot be an organisation that just develops brand values at the board level. You absolutely have to engage with your people, you have to get input. That's the first point. So from there, I then think you have to engage with your other key stakeholders. Now, they will be anything from your shareholders through to your clients or customers, and then from there you decide what sort of engagement and what sort of activation you are going to do as a brand. And it may or may not be sports sponsorship, but that will depend on whatever your brand values as an organisation stand for.
Let's pull it back to this idea of authenticity then. Everyone wants, well, it seems that brands want content marketing now in all of their in all of their partnerships. What constitutes authentic content, Susan?
That's the key question.
How do they keep
right?
it real? How do the brands keep it real?
Good question. Usually they relinquish control. That is usually the first step, and this very much applies to the traditional creative agency world, media agency world. It is about giving this creative freedom to your partners, whether that's on YouTube or other platforms, because the reality is that they can do it better than you can as a brand. They have developed these huge fan bases, whether that's on YouTube or other platforms, in the millions and millions that have consistent engagement. They are doing a better job. So take lessons from them. Even if you're not partnering directly, look at what they're doing, look at how they're engaging with their audience, and use those lessons to develop your own strategy. But partnership, we find, is one of the most effective ways to have a successful content marketing strategy, just because, again, they're living and breathing in this world. Unfortunately, we in the industry are not on a daily basis.
Stewart, I suppose building a complete bespoke system for your partner organisation is about as authentic as it gets.
I'd like to think so. Where a lot of our clients, particularly clubs and leagues, they actually don't own the content that's on the field of play. That's owned by the leagues or the associations. So actually being able to get hold of that content and use it in a fan engagement device presents some interesting challenges. The beauty about our industry is you have to consume it live. Sport is there to be watched at the time of activity. So what we're doing with our clubs and with Real in particular is we are building different forms of content. It's content that can be sampled in bite-sized pieces. Picking up on the comment about millennials. We know millennials do not consume media in a traditional fashion. In fact, they don't go anywhere near conventional media. They're heavily into user-generated content. In fact, they believe more on user-generated content than they do in official media statements. So it's being able to find ways that we can actually allow a fan to upload their own content, their own experience onto the device, and then share that with 450 million Madridistas around the world. It's those elements that we're actually looking at. So we're building unique channels for the club, and it doesn't necessarily have to be at club level. There are some of the world's leading federations that have done long-term media deals that are now looking at new ways that they can embrace digital technology as being a primary communication source for them.
We do have microphones at both sides of the audience, so if anyone does have a question, do raise your hands and I will facilitate the asking of that question. And if you don't have a question, I'll just ask another one of my own. That's fine.
Can I add a point on the UGC? Because I think that's a really,
sure.
a really good theme. I think to your point, we are seeing this huge rise in user-generated content. And historically, brands view UGC as dangerous because it might not communicate that proper brand equity that they want. But it can't be ignored. I think brands have to embrace it and empower their fan bases to create UGC. That does fit more with that brand equity. I think also we're seeing a rise, certainly on YouTube, in the type of fan behind-the-scenes content. We're seeing a rise even from clubs and leagues who are doing tunnel cams, for example. Tunnel cams are hugely popular, millions of views. So you have to be aware that there's this ecosystem of content out there that is around your brand. Identify it, understand who's watching it, and then decide what to do with it.
So interesting, picking up on the tunnel cam. You would have seen on the Real Madrid video that we use the tunnel cam. And on our Real Madrid app, we can broadcast up to kickoff whistle, and then it goes to MediaPro, the host broadcaster. So we do the build up to the game, the tunnel, the players coming out, and then we have an isolated camera that is just on the coach. Doesn't pick up any of the action on the field of play. It's just on the coach. And it's a great way of knowing whether there's been an incident or a goal just by looking at Rafa Benitez's reaction. And we know that fans will not watch a full 90 minutes game on a handheld or small device. But what they will do is they will just keep a watching brief for incidents, and being able to see Rafa's face light up either in indignation or joy is a great way of telling the fans something important has happened. So click back through into other elements of the app.
I'd like to ask you all to sort of play sports marketing agony aunts and uncles for a second. I think every marketer is after that breakthrough moment, and they're after it at as small a cost as possible. Could you just sort of give your advice on how to achieve breakthrough, inexpensive breakthrough moments, and maybe point to one or two examples where that's happened? Mark, you first.
So I think the first core point here is have a communication strategy. So it's all very well having an online strategy, it's all very well branding a stadium, but at the end of it, you have to have a communication strategy. Whatever you do goes back to your core comms. So I think there are two examples that I would point to. The first one, rather topically, is around the Rugby World Cup. I think the 500 days to go activation around the light projection on City Hall with the Tower Bridge in the background, and Tower Bridge acting as the rugby posts to the rugby ball, was a great, very low cost, very inexpensive example of activation. Getty took one photograph with a great media campaign behind it. It was released to the media. Next day, all over social media, all over the front pages. You know, for a £10,000 activation, suddenly you have millions and millions of pounds worth in media value. So I would call that a great return on investment and a great example of how to get low-cost activation.
Stewart, give us a breakthrough moment.
Gosh, there's so many, isn't there? What I'm looking at the moment, which I'm thinking is very clever, is Dove's relationship with the England rugby team. Traditionally we've seen Dove commercials which have been of women. You know, it's a female-orientated brand, and now we've seen Dove actually begin to turn that into a new communication aimed at men. So the England rugby team. You're also seeing it on the side of the Williams Formula One cars. I think that's a breakthrough where, if there's anybody from Unilever in the room, I think they'd agree. It was a brand that was starting to decay. It needed to be reinvigorated, and I think the fact that they switched focus to the male-orientated side is a breakthrough moment. And picking up on the whole comms strategy. Yeah, it goes back to what we were talking about at the top of this panel, that you've got to decide through a number of different sources and using a number of different metrics whether there is the right fit for the brand to the sport or to any sponsorship. And then it's setting out the comms plan. I did some consulting work 3 years ago to a very, very well-known international sports federation. My first day in the chief exec's office, I asked him what his communication plan was, sort of 17 months out from the event. And he looked at me very blankly and he said, "What's the communications plan?" And I said, "You must have a channel plan. You know, you've got all these weeks of activity. We haven't got one." And I said, "Well, how can you then begin to build your communication plan if you don't have a plan to start with?" So, get it right going in. Use the tricks and the tools that the media planners in the agencies use when they're buying your advertising campaigns, and employ that to sport.
Susan.
I think just to return to your point about budgets, and I think it's a really good one. So we're now, as an industry, being asked to take that same pot of money and create more assets, right? So to create 100 assets, what we would have historically used for one TVC. And this is a challenge that we're all facing, and how we budget for that. How do you have an always-on content strategy? And it's not easy. I don't think we've quite answered that yet in terms of our production workflow and financial planning for the year ahead, et cetera, et cetera. But what we have seen is that brands are making smarter use of that money, doing I wouldn't say lower quality, but slightly lower production value type content, but more of it so that it's consistent. I think a great example is, and I hope someone in this room has seen it, but EE did a partnership with one of our top YouTube FIFA gamers named Spencer FC, the Wembley Cup. And what it was 10 episodes, which was a collaboration with a full 28 YouTubers, and Spencer FC kind of led the charge on it. And they did 10 episodes, and each of those episodes published on YouTube. Huge views, also on the EE microsite, but using the YouTube embedded player. And it was a finale, actually a match at Wembley. And that was hugely effective, 10 episodes. The last one was the longer in length, but most of them were more snackable in format, and they did supplemental content. So they took that initial budget and they were able to stretch it over a longer period of time. And they really became a publisher in a sense, because there's 10 episodes, you were waiting for the next one to be released. They had people who subscribed just to follow what was going on with the specific activation. And then, of course, bringing in all those YouTube influencers really helped reach a larger fan base than they would have if they had just produced this content on their own and just put it on the EE channel. So I think it was a really smart activation, great example of collaboration, and great example of just maximizing budget.
Okay. Are there any questions from the floor at this point? Scanning through. There are no questions from the floor. It's interesting that you mentioned Spencer FC, because obviously when the idea of influencers, when you think about influencers in sports marketing, you think about celebrities and you think about sports stars and how you're going to maximize your very short amount of time with these sports stars. But influencers, as you know, come in all shapes and forms. And I guess my question to all of you is, how should brands and how should your brand be making the most of time with influencers? Maybe you first, Susan?
Yeah, so I think there's two approaches for this. So there's one with that traditional celebrity talent. You have a partnership with Barcelona. You try to get as much time as you possibly can on those shoots, creating that more snackable behind-the-scenes content in addition to that TVC. So that's kind of one, maximizing how much content you're creating with that celebrity at that time. And then two, to your point about influencers, identifying the influencers that do work for your brand. So, for example, I'm sure folks are familiar with KSI in this room. I hope so. And he actually, according to Vanity, is rated as more popular than most US celebrities. He has more influence than Johnny Depp. This means a lot. I'm certainly not his target demographic, but he has a huge amount of influence. So even if you don't understand it or like it for that matter, these folks have an amazing amount of reach. So look at the data, look at the insights, look at who the up-and-coming influencers are. Maybe it's a Spencer FC, maybe it's a Free Kickers in Germany, maybe it's Skill Twins coming out of the Nordics. But you have to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in social media. Identify this talent early and develop these partnerships when they are emerging. Don't wait until KSI is already making a few million a year. You have to understand where this talent is coming from and develop a plan early than later.
Mark, are you working with influencers at Icon?
Yep. So as Icon's part of the wider Chime organisation, we have lots of sports ambassadors working with the group. But I think influencers go way beyond your sports personalities. I mean, you have to be tapping into the right authorities, be them local authorities, be them government authorities. And of course, when you're bidding for a large sporting event, such as we were back in 2003 when I was part of the London 2012 bid team, we were bidding on the world stage to bring the Olympics to London. Now, in that case, our influencers were all of the IOC members. So it's not just about social media content. It is, don't get me wrong, plays a really important role. It's about your communication strategy. And it may be a bit of a left field strategy. So part of go back to 2003, there was a great story that came out of the bid, and some say this is how London won the bid, all around a very simple press release the London 2012 media team put out, which was in the cultural field. It wasn't about sports. We were head-to-head with Paris, and we knew they were our rivals. So the comms team got together and said, what's going to be something that is going to shake Paris? So they put out a press release all around the essence of cuisine. And we said, London's the culinary capital of the world. We have more Michelin star restaurants than everybody, including Paris. Of course, Paris were very unhappy with this, so their media team got to work, briefed all of their influencers on why Paris was the culinary capital of the world and not London. They briefed the President, Chirac, said Paris is the culinary capital of the world, to the extent that Chirac went a little bit off-piste. He said, there is only one country in the world worse than London and England for cuisine, and that's Finland. Of course, when it came down to the head-to-head vote on the final day, London won by 2 votes. And guess how many IOC members Finland had?
And Stewart, very quickly, your work with influencers. I mean, do you have, are there particular Real Madrid players who are particularly into your partnership?
Yes. So at a very top level, we're all familiar with Ronaldo. Ronaldo in the digital world has something like 120 million followers on his Facebook account. So being able to actually activate that digital real estate from Real Madrid's point of view and direct them to one-to-one engagements through the fan app is very important. As a brand, part of the relationship we have with Real Madrid is use of their logos and trademarks. We've also now struck up relationships with Marcelo, the Brazilian player. Now, Latin America is a very important market for Microsoft, particularly in the device as well, with Lumia phones and Surface Pro 3, the tablet device. So we have Marcelo now, as a Real Madrid player, talking about and using brand product. And we've seen about a 10% jump in brand take-up just by using him and also the Colombian Hammers in certain markets.
Thank you very much to all of you. I'm going to have to leave it there. So if you could give a warm round of applause to our panelists, Mark Savage, Stewart Mison and Susan Agliata. Thank you very much, guys.